My sketchbook is more than just a book that I do sketches in. It's the place that I spend a lot of time, where I unload a lot of feelings, where I develop a lot of ideas, and it's my constant companion, my studio, my friend. And my sketchbook has been with me when I've had traumatic events in my life. And it all began actually when I wrote this book, which is called Everyday Matters, which is the very first sketchbook story I ever created. It's the story of an accident that happened in my family and that caused a lot of trauma. But I processed it by using my sketchbook as a place to get perspective. And I also wrote this book years later, A Kiss Before You Go, which is also about loss and grief and processing and redemption in the end, of how one can use your sketchbook to get through stuff and to understand it better. And there's another story of trauma. I hate to sound like I'm the trauma guy because I don't see myself that way, but traumas happen to all of us. And the trauma that I'm going to talk about today is a trauma that did in fact happen to all of us 5 years ago during the COVID epidemic or pandemic. And I wanted to show you how I used my sketchbook during that period to process this incredible thing that was happening to all of us and to get some perspective on it. I hope that it'll be helpful to you, and it'll show you how art can be healing in ways that maybe you've never thought about. So in the early spring of 2020, my wife and I went on a trip and unwittingly got stranded thousands of miles from home. We ended up going from our home in New York to California. The New York airports were closed down. We couldn't get back home. This is the very first weekend of the pandemic. And we ended up going with my in-laws to Phoenix, Arizona, where they lived, and spending a few weeks on the couch in their spare bedroom, and then ultimately renting a house and moving with a small carry-on bag full of stuff. And here we are 5 years later, I'm still in that same house. So I want to show you those first days of this transformation and how we dealt with it. This is the sketchbook that I began early that summer, late spring 2020. As I said, we moved into a new house. It was furnished. It was actually a former Airbnb. And so the first thing I did was I just drew all of the chairs in this house. And I did that because it just gave me a sense of being able to own this experience rather than feeling completely like a bewildered guest. These were my chairs now, so I did an inventory of them and I wrote about them. For the first time, I was also living in the desert of Arizona, and so part of what I was dealing with was the insane heat and what effect it had on my body. There also a new form of nature moving from New York City into the desert, and we had pomegranate trees in our yard, and I drew those. We had quails that came by with their babies, and I captured them as well and wrote a little bit about them. These are mourning doves that sit on the phone lines over our backyard, and we had a swimming pool for the first time in my life, and we spent an awful lot of time in the swimming pool because it was extremely hot, and it was very relaxing. And sunscreen, lots of different kinds of sunscreen. Again, trying to get, there's a self-portrait showing myself getting progressively tanner in the heat of the summer. This is the outside of our house. This is my mother-in-law's car that we had borrowed, and I just drew and wrote a little bit about that house. I called it The Mole Hole, in tribute to The Wind in the Willows, one of our favorite books. Here I talk about how I felt about missing New York City and my home. And here's looking down Fifth Avenue. This is my in-law's dog, Marley. I wrote a little bit about him. And here I was counting out my days, 107 days that I had spent, and I measured it by how many tubes of toothpaste we had gone through in that time. practicing some lettering, something that I love to do, and here drawing with ballpoint pen some of the lovebirds that frequent our yard. Doing a bit of self-analysis. That's often what I use my sketchbook for, is to think about how I feel and really how I was worried and various things I was concerned about here. We were just trying to find masks in those early days. It was not easy to find a mask. And so I was doing drawings of different versions of me with different kinds of masks. A new phenomenon. Hummingbirds, another thing in our yard. It's a bit more self-analysis. I was worried about myself and about my wife and about our psychology, as I'm sure you were too during those days. What will become of the world? Because we had nothing with us, we had to buy everything. We had basically brought clothes for the weekend, and here we were having to buy art supplies and swimsuits and things like that. Another self-portrait, another self-portrait, another bird, another self-portrait, another self-portrait. So a lot of that. Here's a drawing a blind contour of a shoe, but also talking about how much walking I've been doing to get some exercise in those days. Drawing dogs, zooming with friends. We really wanted to buy our own car instead of using my mother-in-law's ancient Mercury. Managed to bash my head and get a little cut. All of these things are just so mundane. Getting new glasses and just talking about what that was like, or drawing lunch. Again, mundane, everyday things. Life goes on even in the times of pandemic. Here are things that I am grateful for, things to be thankful for. Everything from the dragonflies that swim by our pool to my sister, who I was worried about on the other side of the country, our car, my new glasses, all the stars that I could see at night, and a special correction pen, and then this giant beetle that appeared in our backyard. Drawing the inside of the car and going on a road trip between Phoenix and Los Angeles and all the places that we had stopped in between. More Zoom calls. In this case, it was doing a course for Sketchbook School on Zoom. All the food that we were eating. Yeah, we ate a lot of food in those days, including a bottle of champagne. And we went glamping, which, if you've never done it, is glamorous camping. Wasn't that glamorous? Here is just a drawing of nature as we drove into northern Arizona on one of our road trips. Here's another drawing of a view of northern Arizona. Talking about a man who I had met, a Native American, when I was on this trip. A little cabin that we stayed in from the 1930s. A selection of different barbed wire. And here I was just writing about how the view of the landscape just reminded me of old westerns and how beautiful and colorful it was. And then flying back to New York for the first time after 6 months. And here's all the equipment that we had to wear on the plane so we didn't get COVID. Memories of candies and treats that I loved as a child when I was growing up in England and Australia. My son's car, which used to belong to us, and got into a car wreck, so I did a drawing of that. Shoes. I spent a lot of time without shoes in the desert there, just talking about the shoes that we'd had. This is a drawing of just the backyard and the trees and having a cocktail outside and relaxing at the end of a stressful day. Another little bird. And finally, Twiglet became our first dog. And here, an explanation of how we came up with her name. And we picked her up at that point. It was Halloween, so I drew various monsters from movies. was the anniversary of my first wife's passing, and I did a drawing of her there on Day of the Dead. And there's Twiglet at 8 weeks old. And here's a skeleton of one of the birds that lives in our backyard. And here I finally wrote, "Summer and this book are over. The heat is on. Virus is surging. Trump won't concede. I heart Arizona." And there's some test pages of that, where I test out my materials. There it is. That one book. This is just a wonderful document for me to have. Even looking back at it now and showing it to you makes me think about those times and be relieved that we managed to get through it all. I'm sure you feel that way too. But, if I hadn't done this, I don't know that I would have really lived through that moment. I know it was terrible, but I lived through it by living in my sketchbook. And that's the power of keeping a sketchbook journal, is the opportunity to really be present, even in hard times. By being present, you can get through it, as opposed to living in your imagination and constantly worrying about what might happen. This allows you to say, let's look at what is happening. And that can often be calming and orienting. I hope this has been helpful. And if you're thinking about keeping a sketchbook journal, I would urge you to start right away. Just get yourself a sketchbook and write down what you did today and do a drawing of something. I'm going to talk about this more in the videos to come, but keeping a sketchbook journal has been the most important practice I've ever had. It has given me so much and helped me to deal and cope with life, to see the beauty and happiness around me, and to count my blessings, and to get past the difficulties. I hope this has been helpful to you, and I look forward to seeing you again. Bye-bye.